different. Remember, they gave 100 Roman soldiers a really easy weekend duty of keeping a dead man dead. I mean, what are you going to do if a soldier? You're supposed to keep a dead man dead. He gets up, you stab him, put him back down. Should be pretty simple stuff, right? 100 soldiers, he's got to come out of that little cave if he comes to life. He's not making it. By the end of the weekend, they're up at Pilate's house saying, Pilate, we all have a problem. You have one too. We couldn't do it. He is alive. We couldn't keep him dead. Jesus won that conflict, praise the Lord. I am really glad for that. So, if Daniel pattern is accurate, whenever the current power attacks a rising power and fails to win, the focus will change. Let's take a look if we have a change of focus here. What power follows Rome is what we're really looking at. Historically, Rome does split north and south. We talked about it before. We have the Greek split. It split north and south. Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. And then Rome splits. Islam arises from Mecca and Medina and pushes up and pushes Christianity out of the Jerusalem area. Christianity comes there during the Crusades, attacks back, and you have a north-south struggle with Jerusalem caught in the middle. Just like the Greek struggle. Jerusalem gets nailed for centuries. And that's the way it's happened. Now, all three of these conflicts appear in one verse in Daniel. Daniel 11, verse 29. At the appointed time, he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. So here we have the appointed time, the former, and the latter. The former is the first one. The appointed time is a time period when some time prophecies come to pass. And the third one is at the time of the end. We're living in the time of the end, according to Daniel 11. So, you have three conflicts between the north and the south in Daniel 11. Or again, remember what Patrick Buchanan talked about? As for a climatic conflict between a once Christian West and an Islamic world that is growing in numbers and advancing inexorably into Europe for the third time in 14 centuries, on this one, Breivik may be right. Third time, Daniel said there will be three conflicts. 14 centuries, that's back to the breakup of the Roman Empire. So we're right on track on Daniel chapter 11. In the coming through time, in Daniel 2, it comes down to divided clay and iron for feet. In Daniel 7, Rome splits up and it has 10 horns, just like there are 10 toes over here. Divided Rome is this time period. This is the time period that we're living in. So now we're going to take a look at something. In this end-time period, the king of the north operates from verses 23 through 45. That's right after Jesus. Jesus is in verse 22. Little horn is of Daniel, in Daniel 7 and 8, is the same time period. And the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians and the beast of Revelation 13 all, interestingly, cover the same time periods. There's enough similarity here that many Bible commentaries, maybe even most, view them as linked or the same power. And so, I'm going to share some very interesting things. They don't, by the way, Bible prophecy students and Bible commentaries don't all agree on which power it's naming or talking about. I'm going to share with you some information on where I've come from. We're going to look at 15 marks of identification that come out of Scripture on this power that takes over from the time of Christ. We have it coming from the time of Rome all the way to the time of deliverance. That's what the king of the north does. Verse 22, talking about Jesus, shall be broken, the prince of the covenant, and also the prince of the covenant. Verse 23, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. Something goes badly. And yet he shall, verse 45, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Verse 12:1, and at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who's found written in the book. I just wanted to get on one slide a few phrases from Daniel 11:23 to 45. Something comes up with a small number of people but acts deceitfully in verse 23. It stays there all the way through 45 when it's destroyed, and Jesus rescues his people. So this Roman division, King of the North, is consistent all the way through. Just like the King of the North was consistent all the way through the Greek breakup. This one will be as well. Also, take a look at the little horn. Again, it goes from Rome to the deliverance. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them. Remember, the beast that is coming up out of is Rome. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. And now, continuing, and they shall take away his dominion, consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. So the little horn comes out of Rome, lasts all the way till it's destroyed, and God's people are rewarded and given the kingdom. That is the same time period as we have for the King of the North. 2 Thessalonians talks about a man of sin. Take a look. Same time period. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Paul's writing this in the 1st century. And the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the brightness of his coming. So 1st century, something's developing, will come out in the open a little bit later and be destroyed at the coming of Jesus Christ. Same kind of time periods that we're looking at here. So the Bible's being consistent on the time period it's being described. And Revelation 13, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, like a bear, and like a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. This is Daniel 7 imagery. If you count the heads that were in Daniel 7, there are 7. If you count the horns, there are 10. It's part leopard, part bear, part lion, part some other kind of beast with those horns on it. And so, the Revelation 13 beast is a composite that comes out of those powers. So it's going to come from those horns of the Roman Empire and last all the way to the coming of Jesus Christ. Notice, and I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies, gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So, we have this power that is, I believe, one and the same. The king of the north, the little horn, the man of sin, the Antichrist power of Revelation 13. All describing the same power that comes from the time of Rome and lasts all the way to the coming of Jesus Christ. Now, I will tell you that Luther, Calvin, Wycliffe, the Wesleys, the Reformers, all taught basically the same thing. Got a book up here. George Eldon Ladd's The Blessed Hope actually calls their viewpoint something that he calls the Protestant view. Now, it's not politically correct to agree with the Reformers on this one, but I'm going to. Now, hear me out. Here's where you really have to hear me. That little horn, beast power, king of the north, is the Roman Catholic papal system, not the people of the Roman Catholic Church. Huge difference. The papal system has been guilty of human rights violations through the years. John Paul even admitted so. Huge difference. I believe there are going to probably be more former Roman Catholics in heaven than from any other church. Probably more former Roman Catholics than former Seventh-day Adventist. Catch, I said former on those too. Because in heaven there's not going to be any this church or that church. We're all formerly something. We're just God's kids there. All right? But why do I think there'll be more of them? Because there's been more of them for more centuries. Even if they had a small percentage, they'd probably have more than anybody else. Okay? God has people within there. As a matter of fact, I believe Revelation 18:4 specifically says he's got people within it. And so I'm not about to argue with God. All right? However, the system fits. Let's ask, does it fit? Coming up from the Roman time period, lasting all the way to the coming of Christ, when does the papacy claim they had the first pope? Peter. That would be first century, wouldn't it? Like Thessalonians said. Interestingly, it says something was keeping it down. What was keeping it down? The imperial Roman Empire, sometimes called pagan Rome. Once pagan Rome began to weaken and a Roman emperor Constantine becomes Christian, the papacy comes out in the open and becomes powerful. Just as described. As the empire begins to break up, a little horn comes up in its place. It fits the history. Now, if you doubt that, who was it that led the Christian forces in the Crusades? It's the papacy. If you want to ask that, every time there's a holy war, it's been the papacy in the lead of the Christian forces. Number two, a second identifier would be that it would be deceitful. So, it said in Daniel 11, after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. Christianity starts out good and peacefully, but quickly it has deceit that comes in. Notice this characteristic is there with the man of sin too. For the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. There's deceitfulness there. And with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And I'm going to be hitting on this one so many times, I hope you get it through, that here is God's truth. You need to follow this. Not what I say, not what any church says. This is what has to be your ultimate authority. And if you walk away from this seminar firmly rooted in that one, or more strongly than when you started, I will praise the Lord for that aspect. So, this would be deceitful. Well, let me back up to that one, on deceitful. The Roman papacy, when it gets its power from Constantine, claims as their authority a document called the Donation of Constantine. This is what gives them power and authority to rule from Rome. The challenge is the Donation of Constantine, their foundational document, is now known to be a forgery. Is that not deceit? They're based on deceit from the beginning. And it was a monk who figured out that that was a forgery. The third one, small but powerful. For he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. The little horn, another horn, a little one coming up among them, speaking pompous words. Okay, did Christianity and papal Christianity start out with a powerful army? No. Christianity, Paul, a dozen or so fishermen, wasn't exactly a mighty army, was it? But once Christianity starts to grow, it becomes deceitful, and then it becomes powerful. And it loses what it had at the beginning. And the papacy, friends, is a very small country to this day. Little over 100 acres. But I would suggest it's probably the most powerful 100 acres in the world. Even in today's world. If you doubt that, go back and watch the footage of John Paul's funeral and see who showed up. It was impressive. Number 4, it would be peaceable and become rich. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds. Wow. You go visit third world cathedrals. What do they have all over them? Gold and all kinds of stuff, right? Well, they became rich. They became rich not exactly through the typical military means, but by telling people to give them their money. And people gave them their money. And they used it on these edifices all over the place. They also became very powerful. For centuries, they decided who would rule the European countries. Number 5, it would have a man at its head. In Revelation, it's he repeatedly, and it's usually talking about King of the North, the leadership of a power. And Daniel 7 and 8, and there in his horns were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. In Revelation and Thessalonians, we have the same ideas. All who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life, and the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And of course, the man of sin is a man. And my thought is, okay, with the papacy, is there a man that's the leader? I kind of view John Paul as the most powerful one in recent years. I might be wrong. Maybe Benedict is a little more powerful than I think he is, but John Paul was definitely a major mover in our world. Number 6, predicted time of their supremacy or rule. Daniel 11:24 and 29 and 35 mention only a time or for an appointed time. There was a duration, a time period designated for them. When we look at Daniel 7, then the saints shall be given into his hands for time, times, and half a time. Well, that's interesting. 3.5 years. Well, they've been around a little longer than 3.5 years, haven't they? Yeah. But remember, a day can be a year. And so, we take a look at that. Revelation covers it this way, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for times, time, and half a time. There we have the same time period that Daniel gives it. 3.5 years. But Revelation does it a couple of ways. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she is a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So at one point it's 3.5 years. The other time it's 1,260 days. By the way, that's 3.5 years. And to make sure you got it, one last time, Revelation throws it a third way. He, the beast, was given authority to continue for 42 months. By the way, a month is typically a 30-day month, right? Multiply 42 times 30 and you get 1,260 days. 42 months is a year and a half. 3.5 years. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. Now notice something. Because it made it clear in Revelation, we know we're not dealing with the 365-day year. We're dealing with the symbolic 360-day year of 12 months of 30 days each. Because Revelation ran it all 3 ways for us to understand. So what happens when you take 42 months or 1,260 days? A day for a year principle we've already talked about. When Pope Vigilus ascends the papal chair in 538 under the military protection of Belisarius, something interesting has happened. 3 of the tribes have been uprooted during this time period because they were Arian, the breakup of the Roman Empire. The tribes had become Christian, the barbarian tribes by and large, but 3 of them had not accepted the Trinity, and the papacy taught the Trinity. And as a basic gift for the others, to the papacy, the other tribes eliminated the Arian ones that did not believe the Trinity. And Arians had been in charge of the area of Rome for a little while, and so Belisarius pushes them out to enforce an edict by Justinian. And 1,260 years later, in 1798, he, the French general Berthier, made his entrance into Rome, abolished the papal government, and established a secular one in its place. 1,260 years of supremacy, where they got to pretty well push around or have the power. Justinian's decree that was actually given in 535 and implemented in 538 was that the Bishop of Rome would be the lead Christian of all the empire. And so, for 500 or 1,260 years he got it, until Berthier captured the Pope, abolished the papal government, and the Pope died in captivity. 1,260 years of supremacy. So, during this time period, it includes the Crusades against Islam and the time of the Ottoman Empire. And again, I will just simply ask, who led the Crusades? The papacy did. Who led the resistance against the Ottoman Empire in Europe? It was papal coordinated-led resistance. They were the leaders of the King of the North. So they would be the king. Islam pushes from the south. It would lead an attack against the south, it even said. Notice, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. There were wave after wave of crusades, depending on how you count them, anywhere from 8 to 12 major crusades. Different historians list them differently. At the appointed time, he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. He leads more than one push against the south. And so you look at your history of Islam and Christianity, and yes, there have been those pushes and those conflicts. It claims that they would think to change times and laws. In Daniel 11:28, it says that the king of the north will war against the covenant, work against the covenant. It also, in Daniel 7:25, say he shall intend to change times and law. Did the papal system attempt to change God's laws, or do they claim that? I'm now going to start using some papal documents, Roman Catholic Church documents, and to illustrate as we go along. The Pope is of so great of authority and power that he can modify, change, or interpret even divine law. The Pope can modify divine law since his power is not of man but of God, and he acts as vicegerent of God upon earth with most ample power of binding and loosing his sheep. I disagree. I believe this is God's word, and no human on this earth has the power to change it. But they claim they have the right and the power to change it. Well, let's keep going. There's a claim. I'll have it out here tomorrow. Sorry, I don't have it with me right now. Just not out. It's just not available. I have this catechism, Peter Gearman's Catechism of Catholic Doctrine. It's an official approved book of the Roman Catholic Church. In it, they talk about changing God's law. They actually changed 3 of God's law. The second commandment, the 4th commandment, and the 10th commandment. They changed 3 out of 10. They eliminated and put in small print as a part of the 1st commandment not to worship images. That moves them all over one. The 4th commandment they've changed, and the 10th commandment they had to split into 2 so that they still had 10. So here's what they actually say about their right to change it. Convert's Catechism. Which day is the Sabbath? Remember, it said he was going to change times and law. And there's one part of God's law that deals with time. Which day is the Sabbath? And they said, Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? We observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. That is why I am a Sabbath-keeping Christian. I don't know what you're going to do about it, but that's why I do it. You have to figure that out on your own. But it matches what the prophecy said, that they would intend to change times and laws. It goes on, the 9th mark of identification, that he would speak great words or blasphemy. We find this all across the board for all of these, Daniel and Thessalonians and Revelation. Then the king shall do according to his own will. This is the king of the north in Daniel 11. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. That would be a reference to celibacy, I believe. Nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. What is blasphemy? Well, in John 10:31, when a man claims to be God, they were going to stone Jesus for blasphemy. The catch was Jesus was telling the truth. Mark 2:5-7, when a man claims to forgive sin, that it was blasphemy, for only God can forgive sin, but since Jesus is God, he can do that. Well, let's take a look. Continuing. Other verses. Daniel 7:8, speaking pompous words, which I believe is the same as blasphemy. A mouth that spoke pompous words, 7:20. 7:25, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. By the way, temple of God in Paul's writings isn't the earthly temple, it's the church. Check it out in Ephesians, for sure, on that one. Revelation 13:5, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. There you have the great things and blasphemies linked together. So we're going to go back to some, again, Catholic documents. Prompta Bibliotheca. The Pope is of so great of dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God and the vicar of God. The Pope is called the Most Holy because he is rightly presumed to be such. So he is, as it were, God. That's pushing it. Prompta Bibliotheca again. He is likewise the divine monarch. Calling it divine is a problem for me. And supreme emperor and king of kings. Jesus is the king of kings. Hence the Pope is crowned with the triple crown as the king of heaven and earth and of the lower regions. Catholic National. The Pope is, as it were, God on earth, sole sovereign of the faithful of Christ, chief king of kings, having plenitude of power. Remember I said Jesus is king of kings? If the Pope is chief king of kings and Jesus is king of kings? I don't like that one either. The Pope is not only the representative of Jesus Christ, but he is Jesus Christ himself hidden under the veil of the flesh. So it goes on. Now what about claiming to be able to forgive sin? This is from John Paul. Rebutting a belief widely shared by Protestants and growing number of Roman Catholics, Pope John Paul II on Tuesday dismissed the widespread idea that one can obtain forgiveness directly from God and exhorted Catholics to confess more often to their priest. I kind of like those Catholics and that are going straight to Jesus Christ for their forgiveness. That's what I find in my Bible to do. Now, Michael Mueller said this, "Seek where you will, through heaven and earth, you will find but one created being who can forgive the sinner, who can free him from the chains of hell. That extraordinary being is the priest, the Roman Catholic priest. Yes, beloved brother, and the priest raises his hand, he pronounces the word of absolution, in an instant, quick as a flash of light, the chains of hell are burst asunder, and the sinner becomes a child of God. So great is the power of the priest that the judgments of heaven are subject to his decision." There's a problem here. Number one, if the priest is my friend and he forgives me even if I'm not serious about it, then God has to forgive me because the priest said so. Number two, if the priest doesn't like me, you ever had a teacher that didn't like you? And you couldn't do nothing right, you could get no good grades, nothing, because the teacher didn't like you, they were going to make sure you had trouble no matter what? You've probably had that kind of teacher somewhere along the line. And if you had a priest who didn't like you and refused to forgive you, you're stuck. So don't get the priest mad. But here's a bind. And if you can get in a real bind with a doctrine, it's probably not legitimate. So what if the local priest gets mad at me, so I move a couple miles away to another town and I make friends with that priest. The other priest wouldn't forgive me, but the new one does. Now what's God going to do? And what I'm pointing out is the doctrine doesn't work. Jesus is the one who decides. Jesus is our mediator. So that one fit. Number 9, it would persecute the saints or God's people. Daniel 7:25, he shall persecute the saints of the Most High. By the way, in Daniel 11:32-36, it says people are going to be doing great things for God, and as a result, they're going to be killed by the sword and by the flame. What happened during the Reformation? If a city became Protestant, they were put to the sword. If it was just the leaders, they'd burn them at the stake. It's an exact description of what happened. There have been millions of people killed under the leadership of the papacy on this one. Revelation 13:7, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. God gave a warning up front that his people were going to get overrun by this power. Christianity in name, but not in spirit. Jesus said about loving your enemies. Loving those who disagreed with you. Their style was kill Christians who disagree, kill Muslims who disagree, kill Jews who disagree. Anybody who disagrees, you can kill them. That's been their history. So, it was fulfilled for centuries. And why was it that so many people fled to the New World? So they could have religious liberty. The persecution, the Inquisition, and all the rest of them in the past. Here's what Pope John Paul said. The Pope says, the Roman Catholic Church must mark the year 2000 by acknowledging its member sins, including intolerance in the name of religion and complicity in human rights crimes. As the second millennium draws to a close, the Church should become more fully conscious of the sinfulness of her children, recalling all those times in history when they departed from the Spirit of Christ. The letter goes on to acknowledge things like the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, and martyrs who died through the centuries. Friends, It still goes on. My family has been on the wrong end of machine guns in South America, simply because I was preaching and the priest was mad. And I didn't even share this presentation. I didn't say a word about them. I was just preaching Bible truth that happened to counteract some of the things that he was teaching. And his people were enjoying listening to the Bible. So we got a visit in the middle of the night. The local people thought it was funny. It wasn't so funny, but we didn't leave. I've had that one in one city, and I've had the Catholic priest out leading street demonstrations trying to get me kicked out of another city in South America. It's rather interesting to watch him riling up the hatred and the anger trying to get us kicked out of town. And like I said, I didn't even bring this part of prophecy up. I wasn't even dealing with prophecy. But I can promise you, there's still a persecuting power when they have the power to do it. I've experienced it. Number 11, it would have a deadly wound healed and would receive worldwide power after it was healed. Well, they received their deadly wound in 1798, but look at what it said in Revelation 13:3. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. Interestingly, the end of Daniel 11 has everybody coming into harmony with the king of the north. So this is a match as well. In 1929, Mussolini signed a concordat with the Pope. Here's what the San Francisco Chronicle said. The Roman question tonight was a thing of the past, and the Vatican was at peace with Italy. In affixing the autographs to the memorable document healing the wound, extreme cordiality was displayed on both sides. From 1929 onward, the papacy has been in a steady march of regaining its power politically. It's had some spiritual power all the way along. But now it's regaining political power to have spiritual and political power, much as it did during the time of its supremacy. If you doubt that, watch some of the statements the papacy is starting to make about the economic situation. And they're suggesting how to cure it their way. And they're calling for rules to follow their guidelines with teeth in them for the world. That was the Pope's words, the teeth in those rules. So, we have the papacy returning in extremely well under Pope John Paul II. I mean, these are the kind of magazines that we have covers about this. And so what am I suggesting in verses 40 to 45 is the time period from the healing wound all the way to the papacy's end. And it comes to its end in Daniel 11:45 and in Revelation 19:20. It has not yet come. We are still in the time period. There are two conflicts. We've had two conflicts. The third is coming. The prophecies also say it will be diverse or different from other kingdoms. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. Daniel 11:23 to 45. It tells us that the king of the north, the context, is both political and spiritual. It attacks real nations with real armies, as during the Crusades and the Ottomans, and it attacks spiritually against the covenant and against God's people. They've done both. It's been a persecuting power, and it's had military power. So this power, all the previous ones, were both spiritual. The previous ones were all political. This one is spiritual, then political. It's different than the former powers. Number 13, it would uproot 3 of those horns, which we just mentioned. And Daniel 7:24, and he shall subdue 3 kings. What is this about? When Europe divides, it breaks into what were commonly approximately 10 barbarian tribes. Here are the 10 most common ones. 3 of them, the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals, no longer exist. The reason, as I mentioned before, they were Arian. They didn't believe the papal teaching on the Trinity. For that, they were eradicated. They are no more. 3 horns are gone. The prophecy, accurate again. Then there's 666. And I'm going to have that book out here later too. It's a book on Vicaris Filii Dei. But here's something. Here's wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for his number is the number of a man. His number is 666. Friends, this is one of the least important characteristics out there, but this is the one everybody thinks about. You go do prison ministries, you're going to find people with 666 tattooed on their knuckles. They're the beast. Don't mess with him. That's what he's trying to say. But I can tell him, folks, he's not been around since the breakup of the Roman Empire. He isn't the beast. He might not be around long enough to be still there when Jesus comes either. We'll see. Some people said, Ronald Reagan, he's a 666, or Gorbachev. Well, friends, Ronald Reagan didn't make it to the return of Jesus, nor was he there at the breakup of the Roman Empire. But there is a term, it's called Vicaris Filii Dei, basically ruling in the place of the Son of God. Here it is in Latin. You take the value of the Latin numerals, like V is a 5, I is a 1, C is 100, A is a 0, R is a 0, I is a 1, B is a 5, you total it up, and it's 112. And somebody says, yeah, but that's a U up there. I have a papal coin in my pocket that will demonstrate that they replace U's with V's in Latin. You can go to the Washington monuments down here and look at places like South Dakota and stuff. Most of them will be spelled S-O-V-T-H because they use Latin form. You're going to find that all over the place. Then the next word, F0, I1, L50, I1, I1, that's a 53. D, 500, E0, I1, 501. Total them together, it's 666. And that term, Vicaris Filii Dei, was a term used in the donation of Constantine and following for the Pope in documentation. And I have a whole book filled with hundreds of references of that title being used for the Pope. The 15th characteristic would receive the dragon's throne. Revelation 13:2, the dragon gave him his throne, his power, his throne, and great authority. Now, who's the dragon? Ultimately, it's Satan, but take a look at Revelation 12:4. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Whose soldiers were used to try and kill Jesus? Those would be Roman soldiers under Herod. Whose soldiers were used to kill Jesus when he was crucified? Roman soldiers. So Satan was using Rome to try and kill Jesus. Who gives the papacy their capital or place of power? To the succession of the Caesars came the succession of the Pontiffs in Rome. When Constantine left Rome, he gave his seat to the Pontiff. That's LaBianca, a Roman Catholic professor in Rome. So, who is this power? We've looked. Luther and the rest of those guys had it on track, I believe, that it is the Roman Catholic papal system. Again, not the Roman Catholic people. Please don't go here and tell people that I'm saying Roman Catholic people won't be in heaven. Not true. I believe they will be. I don't need my life shortened any more dramatically. But the thing is, I promise to tell you the truth as I find it in Scripture. And when I take a look at this, they are the leader of the Christian powers in their fight against Islam. Now, if you'll take a careful look at verses 23 through 29, you will find that the king of the north lies and does evil. Christianity doesn't stay good. So it's not like we're making stuff up. The history and the prophecy are a complete match with each other. And so you have the Reformation, the Crusades, and ultimately the time of the end come into play. But then you had the Counter-Reformation. The papacy wasn't exactly thrilled with this identification of them as the beast or the little horn or the king of the north. Alcazar taught preterism. Daniel and Revelation, they're all in the past, don't worry about it. Then comes Ribera. He teaches futurism. Daniel and Revelation and the Antichrist, they're all future. Don't worry about it. And the Catholic Church accepts both of them as long as you don't worry about it. You get the heat off of them in the middle. Both are still taught today, not only by Catholics, but by Protestants as well today. Now, in my pocket, I have this little coin. It's probably easier for you to read it from the screen. But I do have it in case you want to verify what I have. It is a Vatican, 100 lira. It's from the Vatican. I didn't make this up. If I was in charge of these coins, I would fire the art department for this coin. But this coin came in a series of productions over several years in the late 50s through the early 60s. Mid-50s through mid-60s. On one side, they would have the Pope that was reigning as Pope at that time. On the other side, they have this woman. And the woman has a cup in one hand and a cross in the other. Around the outside of the edge of the coin, it says City del Vaticano. Look up in your dictionary what Vaticano might mean. I'll tell you, it means prophecy. City of prophecy. Now, if I was thinking city of prophecy on the outside of the coin, I would try to remember what the prophecy symbols are when I did that. I'm sure that the art department or whoever put this together was thinking of this woman as possibly the bride of Christ, like in Ephesians chapter 5, or maybe the pure woman of Revelation 12, or maybe Mary, Queen of Heaven. I would have been thinking of one of those things, but again, it would have paid off to read the prophecy. Because friends, Revelation 17 gives a description of the lady they've got on the coin, and it's not flattering. Take a look at Revelation 17, 3 through 6. So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of the names of blasphemy. Not a good context here so far, is it? Full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication, and on her forehead a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Interestingly, the first king of the north, according to Jeremiah, was Babylon. It's now in the position of the last king of the north, using the term to catch your attention to the king of the north. The mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. Again, this all matches. Again, this is the Papal Vatican system. And with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. The reason he marvels with great amazement is the woman hides in Revelation 12 in the wilderness. That was a pure woman, God's pure church, dressed in white. When he sees it again, the church is now fallen. It's a spiritual prostitute. It's left its pureness behind. It's now evil. And he was amazed that the church had transformed in such a horrible way. But friend, the church is not what it used to be at the beginning. You can check it out. The research backs it up. So, here's the Revelation 12 woman off on the left. Revelation 17 woman on the right. I have a question. Symbolically, or in the picture, which one matches? The lady with the cup or the lady without the cup? The lady with the cup matches quite well, doesn't it? And it's the city of prophecy. And there's a woman from prophecy. Now, I can't tell what color the lady's wearing. Not at all sure. But I do know this. Basic Vatican colors are underneath white, scarlet over the top, which matches the colors of the pure woman turning to the scarlet woman. So that's interesting. Now, what about the cup? It's full of abominations. What are the abominations that it might be full of? Ezekiel chapter 8, 14 to 16. So he, God, brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, and you will see greater abominations than these. What is that? The sun god in pagan idolatry sends a beam of light down and hits this virgin, goddess, often called Ishtar in quite a few of them, as the name. She becomes pregnant, gives birth to the son of the sun god. Immaculate conception way before the time of Jesus in the pagan religions. Satan was trying to confuse things from the beginning, from what he read in prophecy. He's always got a counterfeit based on what he sees coming in the prophecy. And so, this sun goddess has this baby, and he grows up, he becomes the son of the sun god, and he is killed. And they weep for him for 40 days, and he comes back to life at the spring solstice. 40 days of Lent before Easter, who's named after the goddess Ishtar. Where did all that come from? I just did a series of meetings down in just outside of New Orleans in Lafayette, Louisiana is where I was at. And the whole culture down there is, before Fat Tuesday, you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. You go out and party with parades, do everything bad you can pretty well think of, and then on Ash Wednesday you go ask for forgiveness and weep about it for 40 days, and then Easter comes. Where did all that come from? Not from Scripture. It came from weeping for Tammuz. And they brought it directly in, and the church follows them in many aspects. He wasn't done. He said he would see greater abominations than these. So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and there at the door of the Lord's temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces towards the east, and they were worshiping the sun towards the east. Here's what happens. To go into the temple, you had to walk west to go into the temple. So you're facing away from the sunrise. These guys turned their back on God and faced the rising sun and worshiped the sun towards the east. And God called that the greater abomination. Catch what's in her cup. A rising sun. Now I want you to think back to Easter, or maybe forward to about what's about to happen. I was backpacking the Appalachian Trail, and I'm a little crazy. I've had 2 1,000-mile backpacking trips. Lots of shorter ones, 100 or 200 miles at a shot. But this particular trip, I was in my late teens, and I hit a clearing, and there were these logs like benches and 3 crosses. And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun was partway up the sky, and it hit me. A few days earlier, there had been a group of Christians up on this spot worshiping towards the rising sun. I don't know what kind of denomination they were from. But friends, God had called that an abomination. Is it wrong to have a resurrection service? No, it's not wrong to have a resurrection service. But I'll tell you what I would do if I was in charge of one. I would sure try and set it up so it wouldn't be classed as something that God would consider an abomination. So what would I do? I would have the empty tomb to the west of the crowd. So when the sun comes up behind them, it hits the empty tomb. The focus should be on Jesus Christ risen, not the sun rising. How about that for a little tweak of the system? And so, friends, if you're involved in any kind of resurrection service, I would challenge you to put it into play on the way it might be more biblical to do it. But papal-led Catholicism brought all that into the church. See what it says across the bottom? Fides? That's a pagan goddess. They even had the name of a pagan goddess on the coin. Look it up. Google it. Check. And so, I find the king of the north in all 3 conflicts to be papal-led Christianity. Yes, I know, the 3rd conflict hasn't happened yet. But friends, I have a question. If the papacy led the first one with the Crusades, and the papacy led Christians in the second one with the Ottomans, who would the Christian world likely turn to for the Christian leader if there was another major outbreak of violence between Islam and Christianity? Which person is considered the leader of Christianity today? Same thing, isn't it? In all these centuries, we haven't changed at all. We're right where we started, which matches Daniel 11 completely. You have an envelope. Let me explain that envelope. I would like you to write a number 2 up to the right-hand corner. There's a little spot there. for a number 2. Now, I'm not going to have you write these questions every time, but I'd like for you to respond, if you would, and I will be taking a look at these. Does it make sense to you that those 15 marks that we've used to identify the papal system as the little horn king of the north, beast power, did those marks come from the Bible, those characteristics, or did they come from somewhere else? So number 1, yes or no, are those marks biblical? And you can say yes, no, or you can even throw in a question there. If you have questions, I'd love to see them. Number 2, do you see that these marks of identity match the papacy? Again, just yes or no. Or you can put a question there. And if you have any other questions or even prayer requests, I would invite you to write them out on that card. Yes, I guess we have, not cards, but envelopes. There's some envelopes. If you don't have one, you want to raise your hand. I think Jennifer will be happy to give you one. Now, I am going to share this as well. This church has taken the risk of paying for all this stuff. If you would like to help them cover the expenses of this, the brochures and the books and the handouts, feel free to put an offering in there. Yes, the gospel is free. You do not need to put anything in it. Notice, with it being a response envelope, you can return it if you're having an offering or not. We're trying to make sure that you're not getting your arms twist to put an offering in there. But as I said, the gospel is free, but it costs a lot to give it away. And if you'd like to help give it away, feel free to do so. And I will also mention, at the very end of the seminar, if somebody wanted to help my ministry, we would share with you at that time how you could do that. But I encourage you to help cover the cost of this material. It's sizable in the money that they put into this. Okay. I think I kind of made up for that late start, and I went fast. Hopefully that wasn't a problem. And let's bow our heads together for a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I ask that you would lead each of us in our lives. Help us to truly be loving and kind, but honest. Help us to dig into your word for ourselves. And Lord, you promised to send the Holy Spirit to lead and guide us in the truth, so I claim that for everyone here. And as you go with us, help us to follow you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me explain our next presentation. It's the role of the United States in prophecy in this coming conflict. Now, some prophecy experts say the United States does not have a role in prophecy. And they've got to go to great lengths to get rid of the United States beforehand, because right now the United States is the major player. I see very clearly a role for the United States in these prophecies. To just give you a little teaser ahead of time, during the Crusades, the papacy didn't have its own army, did it? It borrowed armies from others. By the way, they don't even have their own police force, really. They borrow Swiss guards. They have a little bit, but they're still borrowed from other places. During the Ottoman conflict, they borrowed armies of different forces to throw against the Ottomans. During the third conflict, whose army would get used by papal forces? Not necessarily papal forces, but who would be the papal forces? Think about that for a moment, and we will explore that tomorrow evening at 7:15. This presentation will be repeated at 5:30 tomorrow. Please make sure that if you didn't already get your card punched tonight, that you get it punched on the way out. We're going to try and ask you, because the foyer is small and we've got people coming and going with 2 seminars, make sure you take it upon yourself to be responsible to make sure that they have you checked in, because we want to give you that concordance if you earn it. And we want you to be able to get it as soon as you can, so you can start checking to see if what we're saying is actually in there. And it is. But God bless. I'm going to be slipping out back. We should have some, yep, we do, at the door to collect those envelopes on the way out. God bless, and feel free to ask me some questions.